This is the story of Stalingrad, a city reduced to rubble, yet a place where the course of the Second World War was forever changed. Welcome to Fall Asleep 2. If long, gentle journeys through history, philosophy, and the stars bring you comfort, consider subscribing so you'll always have another story waiting. Now get comfortable, let the world grow quiet, and let's get started. Roughly 201 million years ago, the Earth stood on the edge of transformation. The Triassic period had just ended in dramatic fashion. A mass extinction had swept through the planet, wiping out nearly 80% of marine species and opening ecological space for new life to rise. And so began the Jurassic period, a span of time that would last over 55 million years, witnessing one of the most profound revolutions in the history of life on Earth. To understand the Jurassic world is to imagine a planet that is both familiar and utterly alien, a place where the air was warmer, the seas were broader, and the very face of the Earth was changing. This was a time when continents began to drift apart, when vast conifer forests covered the land, and when giants, real, thunderous giants, began to dominate. The name Jurassic itself comes from the Jura Mountains, a range between France and Switzerland, where rocks from this time period were first studied. It's a poetic name, evoking misty highlands and ancient stone, and it captures the feeling of the age, enduring, mysterious, and grand. Let us begin our journey by looking at the Earth itself. At the dawn of the Jurassic, the continents were not where you know them today. Instead, they were united in a supercontinent called Pangaea, a colossal landmass that stretched almost from pole to pole. Surrounded by the vast global ocean known as Pangaea, this single continent was just beginning to fracture. Slowly, like a slow breath over eons, Pangaea began to crack along fault lines and rifts. The early Jurassic marked the start of the separation between what would become Laurasia in the north, containing North America, Europe, and Asia, and Gondwana in the south, composed of what we now know as South America, Africa, India, Australia, and Antarctica. Between them, a new ocean was forming, the Tethys Sea, a warm and shallow expanse of water that would cradle life in its gentle currents for tens of millions of years. This gradual tearing of the Earth's crust didn't just reshape the land, it also stirred deep tectonic forces that triggered volcanic eruptions, reshaped coastlines, and altered global climate patterns. Magma welled up from the Earth's mantle, forcing land to bulge and split. New ocean basins formed, and the geography of the planet was rewritten over countless millennia. Yet despite the shifting plates and fiery fissures, the climate of the early Jurassic was remarkably stable and warm. There were no ice caps, no glacial sheets. The polar regions were humid and temperate. Tropical rainstorms swept over ancient coastlines. Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels were higher than they are today, contributing to a greenhouse world that was teeming with moisture and life. The absence of polar ice meant sea levels were higher, flooding continental interiors and creating vast, shallow inland seas. These seas acted as nurseries for marine life and corridors for the spread of new species. In this balmy environment, life blossomed. But not the kind of life you might be picturing. The plants that covered the Earth during the Jurassic were not flowering shrubs, tulips, or grasses. Those wouldn't appear until millions of years later. Instead, the land was ruled by ferns, horsetails, cycads, and towering conifer trees. These plants thrived in the wet, warm climate, creating dense forests that sprawled across the continents. In the shadow of these forests, dinosaurs, once small and relatively unimportant, began to rise. They had already existed during the Triassic, but the extinction event at the end of that period had wiped away much of their competition. Now, in the Jurassic, they were free to grow, in size, in variety, in dominance. Among them were the sauropods, long-necked, long-tailed herbivores like Cetiosaurus and Volcanodon. These giants would become icons of the Jurassic world, some reaching lengths of over 60 feet and weights of more than 20 tons. They lumbered through ancient floodplains and forests, shaking the earth with each step, but more on them later. For now, as the early Jurassic world takes shape before us, imagine a planet wrapped in green, broken by mountains of fire and lakes of salt. A world where no grass rustles in the wind, but ferns sway in thick humidity. A world ruled not yet by birds, but by their ancient ancestors. A world just beginning to awaken to the age of dinosaurs. And with that, we drift forward into the heart of the Jurassic world. As we move deeper into the Jurassic, the Earth is growing restless, not in the violent sense of chaos, but in the steady, inevitable motion of tectonic plates and evolutionary momentum. This is a world constantly reshaping itself above and below the surface, and everything that lives upon it is part of that great transformation. The climate continues to warm. Rainfall increases in many parts of the world. Dense forests of towering conifers, along with tree ferns and cycads, spread like green blankets across the supercontinent's rifting edges. These forests create pockets of shade, paths for migration, and shelters for smaller creatures. The land is alive with movement, most of it reptilian. And it is here, in this lush and evolving world, that the true age of dinosaurs begins. The most iconic of all Jurassic creatures were the sauropods, colossal, long-necked herbivores that defy imagination. In the early Jurassic, they were smaller, more compact. Creatures like Volcanodon and Barapasaurus roamed the river deltas and fern-covered plains. But as time passed, evolution favoured size. Bigger necks meant better access to high foliage. Massive bodies meant protection against predators. And so the sauropods grew. They grew into creatures like Brachiosaurus, Apatosaurus, Diplodocus, and Camarasaurus, names that echo through museums and science books today, but once referred to breathing, thundering titans. The mechanics of their bodies were masterpieces of natural engineering. Hollow bones reduced their weight. Long necks balanced by muscular tails gave them agility in their own slow, sweeping way. Their size alone made them kings of their domain. Few predators dared attack an adult. Apatosaurus, not even the fiercest carnivores, but predators did rise, and they were just as remarkable. Among them, Allosaurus stood out as the apex hunter of the mid to late Jurassic. With serrated teeth designed for slicing flesh and strong legs for sudden bursts of speed, Allosaurus was a nightmare of muscle and instinct. It likely hunted in packs, coordinating attacks on the old or young among sauropod herds. It may not have had the bulk of later predators like T-Rex, but it was fast, efficient, and terrifying. Other predators, too, stalked the forests and plains. Ceratosaurus, with its distinctive horned face and powerful jaws. Megalosaurus, one of the first dinosaurs ever discovered by modern humans. Each filled a niche in the complex and often brutal food web of the Jurassic. But not all dinosaurs were giants or killers. Alongside the thunderous sauropods and roaring predators lived smaller, more agile species. Dinosaurs like Ornitholestes and Calurus darted through the underbrush. Some, such as the early hypsilophodonts, were nimble herbivores, relying on speed and awareness rather than bulk or armour. And then, slowly, something new began to stir in this world of scales and teeth. Feathers. It's tempting to imagine the Jurassic as a world of only leathery skin and lizard-like forms, but that would be misleading. Many theropods, the group of dinosaurs that includes Allosaurus and eventually birds, began to develop proto-feathers during this time. These were not for flight, but for warmth, for display, perhaps even for camouflage. Tiny feathered dinosaurs, like Anchiornis and Eosinopteryx, are known from late Jurassic fossils. They were agile, bird-like, and lived in trees or along riverbanks. The line between bird and dinosaur, it turns out, is not a line at all. It is a gentle slope. And the slope begins here. In the mid-Jurassic, in the region that would one day be southern Germany, a remarkable creature appeared, Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx is often called the first bird, though in truth it is a blend of old and new. It had feathered wings, yes, capable of some form of gliding or limited flight, but it also had teeth in its mouth, claws on its wings, and a long bony tail. It was a mosaic of evolution, a bridge between the age of reptiles and the coming age of birds. Its presence in the fossil record tells us something profound, that even in an age ruled by giants, the small and the delicate were also evolving, adapting, surviving. And so the world of the Jurassic becomes more than just a story of size. It is also a story of diversity. From the oceans to the forests to the skies, life is branching, exploring every possible shape, strategy, and way of living. But for every animal that rose, another fell. Extinction was never far away. Climate shifts, volcanic eruptions, and changing ecosystems continually reshaped the stage. And so the Jurassics marched on, filled with birth and death, growth and collapse. The stage was set. The giants had risen. The forests were thick. The oceans teemed with reptiles and ammonites. And in the shadows, evolution whispered to feathers, to flight, to futures undreamed. As the Middle Jurassic gave way to the late, the planet continued to shift beneath it all. If the forests of the Jurassic were home to titans, then the seas were ruled by monsters. Beneath the waves, life was no less vibrant, no less dramatic. The warm, shallow seas of the Jurassic, especially those formed by the breakup of Pangaea, became cradles for marine evolution. With higher sea levels than today and no polar ice, much of the land was submerged beneath shallow continental shelves, perfect for the explosion of new species and ecosystems. The oceans were teeming with predators, grazers, and filter feeders, many of which were unlike anything alive today. Let us begin with the most iconic, the marine reptiles. First, there were the ichthyosaurs. These sleek, dolphin-like reptiles had already been around since the Triassic, but during the Jurassic, they flourished. With large eyes, streamlined bodies, and powerful tails, ichthyosaurs were built for speed. They likely hunted in pods, chasing schools of fish and squid-like cephalopods. Some species grew up to 50 feet in length. Their resemblance to dolphins is no coincidence. It is an example of convergent evolution, where different creatures develop similar traits because they live in similar environments. Then came the plesiosaurs, with their long necks and small heads, and their equally terrifying cousins, the pliosaurs, who had short necks and massive skulls filled with dagger-like teeth. Whereas plesiosaurs, like Cryptoclydus, may have hunted smaller fish and crustaceans with precision and grace, pliosaurs, such as Liopleurodon, were apex predators, capable of tearing apart other marine reptiles. Their enormous jaws could crush bone, and their bite was among the most powerful of any creature, past or present. These marine reptiles were not dinosaurs. Though they lived at the same time, they followed a different evolutionary path. returning to the sea from land-based ancestors. They breathed air, gave live birth, and some may have had surprisingly high intelligence for reptiles. But they were not alone in the seas. The Jurassic oceans also buzzed with invertebrate life. Ammonites, with their coiled shells and complex patterns, drifted in great numbers. They were distant relatives of today's octopuses and squid, propelling themselves with bursts of water through narrow openings in their shells. Some were the size of your hand, others the size of a cartwheel. Their diversity was astounding, and they are now one of the most useful fossil groups for dating ancient rocks. Alongside them swam belemnites, similar to modern squid, but with a bullet-shaped internal shell that fossilized well. And then there were the crinoids, also called sea lilies, which attached themselves to the seafloor like underwater flowers, filtering nutrients from the current. The ocean floors of the Jurassic were bustling with brachiopods, bivalves, and corals. Reef systems flourished, especially in the warm waters of the Tethys Sea. These coral reefs provided shelter for countless fish, crustaceans, and mollusks. Reef ecosystems, much like today's, were vibrant, complex, and fragile, sensitive to changes in sea level and temperature. In these shallow seas, sharks swam as well, ancient relatives of modern species. They were sleeker, smaller, and occupied many ecological roles, from scavengers to active predators. Some, like Hybodus, had teeth adapted to both grinding and tearing, allowing them to feed on a variety of prey. But perhaps most remarkable of all was the sheer scale of life. From the smallest plankton to the largest marine reptiles, the Jurassic seas were densely populated. Nutrient-rich waters, warm temperatures, and few mass extinction events during this time created ideal conditions for marine expansion. And yet, as dynamic as these ecosystems were, they were deeply connected to the shifting of continents above. As Pangaea fractured, oceanic ridges pushed water into low-lying areas of the land. Volcanoes beneath the sea pumped minerals into the water, feeding plankton blooms. Rivers carried sediment from the growing mountain ranges into the oceans, creating deltas and estuaries where new ecosystems could emerge. The movement of continents didn't just reshape the land, it also reorganized the oceans, creating isolated basins, internal seas, and narrow straits. These new oceanic barriers influenced which species could migrate and which were isolated, further driving evolution and speciation. And while the seas were often calm and fruitful, they were also capable of violence. Underwater landslides, called turbidity currents, could bury entire ecosystems. Volcanic eruptions caused oxygen-deprived dead zones. Storms stirred the shallow seas, breaking coral reefs and washing creatures far inland, some of whose fossilized remains are found today, perfectly preserved in layers of fine sediment. To imagine the Jurassic Ocean is to imagine a world in constant motion, a place where every ripple, every tide, every tectonic shift shaped the course of life. As above, so below. As the Jurassic period advanced, the Earth's crust continued its slow, powerful transformation. What had begun as tiny fractures and subtle rifts during the early Jurassic evolved into monumental geologic changes that would shape the continents we know today. At the heart of this transformation was the breaking of Pangaea, a process that took tens of millions of years but altered everything, from the path of the oceans to the rise of new ecosystems. To understand what was happening, picture the Earth not as a static globe, but as a living, breathing sphere. Its surface, the lithosphere, is broken into massive tectonic plates that float atop the hot, semi-fluid layer of the mantle below. These plates move, grind, and pull apart at speeds of only a few centimeters per year. But over geologic time, even the slowest movement redraws the map. During the Jurassic, those plates were shifting in dramatic fashion. The once unified supercontinent of Pangaea began to split into two major landmasses. Laurasia, drifting north, would become North America, Europe, and Asia. Gondwana, drifting south, would give rise to South America, Africa, India, Antarctica, and Australia. This division wasn't neat or immediate. It occurred along massive rift valleys, similar to today's East African rift, regions where the land itself was pulled apart by the stretching forces of the earth. These rifts eventually sank and filled with water, forming the early stages of new oceans. One of the most important of these was the Atlantic Ocean. In the Middle Jurassic, a narrow strip of ocean began to form between what is now Africa and North America. As rifting continued, mid-ocean ridges rose along the seafloor, underwater mountain ranges where new crust was created by upwelling magma. These ridges expanded, pushing the continents farther apart and widening the Atlantic with each passing millennia. This was not a quiet process. The stretching of the crust triggered volcanic eruptions, released massive amounts of carbon dioxide, and created new landscapes. Entire mountain ranges rose and eroded. Rivers changed course. Inland seas appeared and disappeared. These shifts affected not only geography, but also climate. With the continents drifting apart, new coastlines formed. These coasts were warm, shallow, and teeming with life. Sediments from rivers and volcanic ash helped form fertile deltas and muddy basins. In these places, plant life flourished, especially ferns, conifers, and cycads. And with abundant plant life came herbivores and the predators who followed them. The reshaping of the continents also influenced wind and weather patterns. As land masses moved and new mountain chains emerged, they blocked prevailing winds, redirected rainfall, and created varied microclimates. Some regions became wetter, others dried out. For instance, areas once covered in vast forests began to transition into more open, fern-dominated landscapes. Inland areas, cut off from moist ocean air by new mountain ranges, became more arid. These ecological shifts drove evolutionary pressures. Dinosaurs and other animals had to adapt or disappear. In some places, new islands formed, isolated patches of land that drifted away from the main continents. These islands became natural laboratories for evolution, where creatures developed in isolation, unchallenged by mainland competitors. This phenomenon, called island endemism, would become more important in the Cretaceous, but its roots were in the Jurassic. The seas between the separating continents, like the growing Tethys Sea, expanded. These warm, nutrient-rich bodies of water supported coral reefs, shallow lagoons, and complex marine ecosystems. They also acted as migration corridors for marine life, allowing some species to spread across vast distances, while others were trapped in newly isolated waters. Even the sky was changing. As the land shifted and the atmosphere warmed, new weather patterns developed. The Jurassic was largely a greenhouse world, meaning it lacked polar ice and had higher global temperatures. Rainfall was heavy in equatorial regions, supporting tropical forests, while temperate zones experienced long, humid growing seasons. Lightning storms, monsoons, and dry spells shaped the landscape, influencing what grew and what didn't. Fossilized tree rings and sediment layers from this period show cycles of drought and abundance, suggesting a world that pulsed with rhythm, not a static paradise, but a dynamic, breathing earth. Beneath it all, magma chambers boiled and seethed. Volcanic activity was common during the Jurassic, especially near rifting zones. Lava flowed across the land, ash clouds darkened the skies, In some cases, these eruptions triggered localized extinction events, wiping out entire ecosystems and resetting the evolutionary clock. Yet from this destruction came opportunity. The splitting of Pangaea created ecological niches, new homes, new climates, new boundaries. Species that once competed now found themselves in different regions. Populations that had been united were suddenly separated, evolving along different paths. This geographic isolation is one of the most important drivers of speciation, the process by which new species emerge. The world of the late Jurassic, then, was a planet in motion, not just physically, but biologically. The dinosaurs were growing in diversity. Birds were beginning their silent ascent into the skies. The oceans were thick with life, and the very ground beneath their feet was drifting, inch by inch, into the future. When we think of Earth's natural beauty today, we often imagine fields of flowers, buzzing bees, and the scent of blooming petals drifting through a summer breeze. But in the Jurassic, flowers did not exist. Instead, the plant kingdom was ruled by green giants, spore bearers, and the slow, ancient rhythm of evolution. The Jurassic world was a garden unlike any we know, one filled with ferns, conifers, and cycads, stretching from pole to pole in endless waves of green. Let's step into that ancient forest now. The Fern Empire. In the undergrowth, where sunlight filtered down in shafts through the high canopy, ferns reigned supreme. These plants are ancient. Some species are virtually unchanged from their Jurassic ancestors. Ferns reproduce through spores, not seeds or flowers. They require moist environments for part of their reproductive cycle, which is why they thrived in the humid Jurassic climate. Their delicate, feather-like fronds carpeted the forest floor, curled in tight spirals when young and unfurling in soft, patterned waves. Around them grew horsetails, tall, bamboo-like plants with hollow stems and jointed segments. They were remnants of an even older era, the Carboniferous, but still held on in the wet lowlands and riverbanks. Together, ferns and horsetails formed the green tapestry that supported the herbivorous dinosaurs. Sauropods in particular would have grazed or browsed on these low-growing plants when not reaching for taller fare. The conifer canopy. Above the ferns stretched the real giants, the conifers. Unlike modern pine forests, Jurassic conifers were often massive, some towering over 100 feet into the sky. Species such as Araucaria, Brachyphyllum, and Chirolepidiaceae dominated the high canopies of the Jurassic world. These trees bore cones, not flowers, and used wind to spread their pollen. Their thick, waxy needles allowed them to survive in a wide range of climates, from dry uplands to moist coastal forests. The vast forests of conifers were home to nesting dinosaurs, small insectivores, and early mammals. Fallen trunks created bridges across rivers and damp shelters beneath. Dead trees rotted slowly, feeding fungi and recycling nutrients back into the soil. The smell of these forests would have been rich with resin and bark, earthy, deep, and sharp. Wind would have whistled through dense branches, carrying pollen in clouds invisible to the eye. Cycads and ginkgos, the ancient strangers, scattered between the ferns and the conifers, were some of the most distinctive plants of the era, cycads and ginkgos. Cycads looked like a strange cross between palms and ferns. They had thick trunks, often unbranched, with a crown of stiff, feather-like leaves. Their appearance was primeval, even alien. Despite their exotic form, they were incredibly successful, covering large stretches of land across Jurassic Gondwana and Laurasia. Cycads are gymnosperms, like conifers, meaning they don't produce flowers or fruits. Instead, they form cones, often large and colourful, at the centre of their leaves. Many were toxic to herbivores, a defence that may have influenced the evolution of certain dinosaur digestive systems. Then there were the ginkgos, a group that today is represented by a single surviving species, Ginkgo biloba. But during the Jurassic, they were far more common. With fan-shaped leaves and a unique way of growing, ginkgos stood out against the forest palette. Their seeds were encased in fleshy coatings and likely gave off a strong, unpleasant odour, perhaps deterring some animals or attracting others that helped disperse them. Ginkgos are often called living fossils, and to walk through a grove of them today is to step back in time. Their Jurassic ancestors may have looked remarkably similar. A world without grass. One of the strangest facts about the Jurassic plant world is what wasn't there. No grasses, no wheat, no bamboo, no rolling meadows. Grasses wouldn't evolve until the late Cretaceous and wouldn't become widespread until long after the dinosaurs had vanished. This means the entire ecosystem of the Jurassic was built on plants that modern ecosystems no longer rely upon. Without grasses, herbivores grazed on ferns, cycads, and early seed ferns. The ground was often soft with mosses or covered in leaf litter. The terrain may have resembled a mixture of tropical forest and primeval woodland, damp and buzzing with insect life. The role of fire and fungi lightning was common during the Jurassic. Storms rolled across the warm globe, igniting wildfires that swept through dry regions. These fires cleared underbrush, released nutrients, and allowed new growth to take hold. In some cases, they may have even influenced the evolution of plant traits like thick bark or rapid regeneration. Fungi too played their part. Beneath the soil, vast networks of mycorrhizal fungi connected trees and plants, sharing nutrients and maintaining the health of entire forests. Dead trees and fallen leaves decomposed slowly, and fungi were nature's recyclers. These invisible worlds, the spores, roots, and microscopic connections, were as essential to Jurassic life as the towering trees and lumbering dinosaurs above. A dinosaur's diet. For the massive herbivores of the Jurassic, plant life wasn't just scenery, it was sustenance. The digestive systems of sauropods were adapted to break down tough plant material, likely aided by vast chambers of bacteria and extended fermentation. Some researchers even believe they swallowed stones, gastroliths, to help grind plant matter in their stomachs. Dinosaurs may have followed migratory routes through forests, leaving behind trampled clearings and fertilized paths. The interaction between dinosaurs and plants was one of constant tension. Growth, grazing, regrowth. A cycle that shaped both parties. Plants evolved chemical defenses, spines and toxins. Dinosaurs evolved longer necks, stronger jaws, and more complex behaviors. The balance between life and consumption, between flora and fauna, was one of the central dynamics of the Jurassic. In this great green world of cones and spores, where ferns whispered in the breeze and conifers scraped the sky, life flourished not in flowers, but in form and persistence. When we think of the Jurassic period, our minds often leap immediately to dinosaurs, towering sauropods, and snarling theropods. But these titans, though dominant, were only part of a much larger and richer world. Beneath their feet, in their shadows, and above their heads lived countless other species, creatures small, strange, and often overlooked. This is their story. The mammals, the insects, the amphibians, the flying reptiles, and the earliest birds, the quieter players in the Jurassic symphony of life. The mammals emerge. It might surprise you to learn that mammals were already present during the Jurassic, and had been in fact since the late Triassic. But these mammals were not the kind that rule the earth today. They were tiny, often nocturnal, and lived in niches where they could avoid the attention of larger predators. Most were insectivores or omnivores, scurrying through the underbrush, climbing trees, or digging burrows. One of the most famous Jurassic mammals is Morganucodon, a small, shrew-like creature with sharp teeth and a likely appetite for insects and worms. Another is Docodon, notable for its advanced jaw and teeth, showing how mammals were already diversifying. Some species, such as Castoricorda, were semi-aquatic, suggesting that even in the Jurassic, mammals were exploring different ways of life. Others had adaptations for gliding, climbing, and burrowing. While small, these mammals were innovators. Their brains were relatively large for their size. Many likely had fur, a critical adaptation for temperature regulation and sensory feedback. They probably bore live young, and some may have nursed them in nests hidden beneath leaves and logs. For tens of millions of years, mammals survived by staying out of the way, thriving in the margins while dinosaurs ruled the daylight. But their time would come. Flying reptiles, the pterosaurs. Before birds took to the skies, the pterosaurs ruled them. These flying reptiles, often mistaken for dinosaurs, though they were a distinct group, evolved in the late Triassic but became far more diverse during the Jurassic. They came in many shapes and sizes. Some were no larger than sparrows. Others, like the later Pteranodon, would stretch their wings over 20 feet, though true giants would not appear until the Cretaceous. In the Jurassic, rhamphorhynchoids were common, characterized by long tails with diamond-shaped tips and sharp conical teeth. They likely hunted fish, insects, and even small vertebrates. Pterosaurs had hollow bones, powerful breast muscles, and wings formed from a membrane of skin and muscle, stretching from their elongated fourth finger down to their ankles. Their bodies were covered in pycnofibers, hair-like structures that may have helped regulate body temperature. They soared over coastal cliffs, dove into oceans, and nested in colonies. Their eyes were large, suggesting keen vision. They were masters of the wind long before birds evolved feathers. The first birds, and yet birds were indeed beginning to appear. As we touched on earlier, the late Jurassic saw the emergence of Archaeopteryx, a creature with both avian and reptilian features. It had wings and feathers, but also teeth, claws on its fingers, and a long bony tail. Archaeopteryx was found in what is now southern Germany, preserved in the fine limestone of a shallow sea lagoon. These fossils are some of the most famous in paleontology, a snapshot of evolution in motion. It's unclear how well Archaeopteryx could fly. It may have glided from tree to tree or used short bursts of powered flight. But it is clear that it represents a transitional form, a bridge between the ground-running theropods and the skies that birds would one day dominate. Other early birds and bird-like dinosaurs, such as Anchiornis, suggest that feathered flight may have evolved more than once, or through multiple stages. Evolution, after all, rarely travels in a straight line. Amphibians and reptiles of the shadows. In the humid wetlands, forests and riverbanks of the Jurassic, amphibians continued their quiet reign. Large salamander-like creatures lurked in streams, while frogs and toads began to diversify. Many of these amphibians would have lived secretive lives, hunting at night, breeding in temporary pools, and feeding on insects and small prey. Meanwhile, reptiles beyond dinosaurs also flourished. Turtles, or more specifically their early ancestors, were present. Some had fully developed shells, while others still showed traces of transitional forms. Crocodile relatives, too, were widespread. Some lived in freshwater habitats, and looked much like modern crocs. Others, such as Metriorhynchus, had adapted to the ocean, developing fins and a tail fluke for marine life. These marine crocodiles were sleek, agile hunters, very different from their slow, ambush-based descendants. They hunted fish and squid, navigating the Jurassic seas alongside ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs. Insects and the hidden world. Beneath the ferns, buzzing in the air and crawling under bark, the insects of the Jurassic were building the quiet foundations of the biosphere. Beetles, dragonflies, crickets, and early flies filled the air. Some species had wingspans larger than your hand. Others were armoured like tanks, hiding in the leaf litter or boring into wood. What's most remarkable is how many Jurassic insect groups still exist today. Many modern insect lineages had already emerged, though bees and butterflies would wait for flowering plants in the Cretaceous. These insects fed on plants, dung, fungi, and each other. They were food for early mammals, small reptiles, and even feathered dinosaurs. They pollinated cycads and spread spores. Though small, insects played an enormous role in keeping the Jurassic ecosystems in balance. The world of the Jurassic was not just about giants. It was also about balance. The interplay of the large and the small, the dominant and the hidden. Dinosaurs may have thundered across the plains, but it was in the trees, the soil, the air and the water that some of the most enduring life forms thrived. Often unnoticed, but never unimportant. It's one thing to know the names of dinosaurs and the plants they fed on. It's another to imagine how they lived, how they moved through the forests, how they raised their young, how they hunted, nested, migrated, or competed. Fossils give us bones, solid and silent, but they also whisper of behaviour if we know how to listen. In this chapter, we step away from species lists and dive into the living world of the Jurassic, into courtship rituals, social lives, migration patterns, and the everyday drama that played out across this ancient planet. Tracks in the stone. Much of what we know about Jurassic behaviour doesn't come from bones. It comes from trace fossils. These include footprints, burrows nests, coprolites, fossilised dung, skin impressions. Across the globe, especially in North America, China and Europe, ancient lakebeds and floodplains have preserved dinosaur trackways, long trails of footprints that tell stories no skeleton ever could. From these tracks, scientists can estimate walking speed, herd behaviour, and even social interactions. For instance, parallel sauropod tracks suggest that these giant herbivores moved in groups, perhaps for protection or to help navigate migration routes. Theropod tracks, from carnivores like Allosaurus, often appear alone, but sometimes show multiple individuals moving together, raising the possibility of pack hunting or social groups. Some trackways even show predator and prey crossing paths, frozen moments of ancient tension. Nesting and family life. One of the most remarkable discoveries in paleontology has been the dinosaur nest. Fossilized eggs, found in clusters or lined up in organized patterns, suggest that many dinosaurs cared for their young. Some species, especially among the theropods, may have even brooded their eggs, much like modern birds. In some nesting sites, dozens of nests are found together, indicating colonial nesting grounds. These would have been noisy, chaotic places filled with squealing hatchlings and vigilant parents, a dynamic community of life. Eggshell fragments and embryo fossils show us how dinosaurs grew before hatching, while coprolites reveal their early diets. And among herbivores like Camarasaurus, evidence suggests that juveniles may have remained close to the herd for extended periods, protected by adults as they grew. This points to something powerful: parental investment, a social bond stretching beyond egg-laying, a trait that links dinosaurs ever closer to birds. Courtship and display. In the forests and plains of the Jurassic, beauty had a purpose. Bright colours, elaborate crests, tail fans, and frills. Many dinosaurs likely used visual displays for courtship and communication. We see this clearly in modern animals: the peacock's tail, the antlers of deer, the plumage of birds of paradise. These features evolve not for survival alone, but for attraction. And it's likely that many Jurassic dinosaurs played the same evolutionary game. Consider the ceratosaurs, with horned faces and bony ridges, likely used in visual display or dominance contests, or theropods with proto-feathers that may have shimmered in the light. These features weren't just for show. They were signals of strength, of health, of genetic fitness. Some dinosaurs may have engaged in headbutting, contests. Others performed mating dances or vocalized to attract mates. While the evidence is limited, the possibilities are vivid, and as feathers evolved, they may have served a dual function, first for display, then for insulation, and eventually for flight. Migration and movement. The Earth of the Jurassic was a greenhouse world, warm and mostly ice-free, but it was not without its seasonal changes. Regions near the poles experienced seasonal daylight extremes, and inland areas faced cycles of rain and drought. In response, many large herbivores likely migrated, following the rains, chasing fresh vegetation, or returning to traditional nesting grounds. Fossil beds show a mix of species from different regions, possibly indicating seasonal movements. Long-necked sauropods may have travelled dozens or even hundreds of miles each year, their footfalls shaking the ground as they moved in slow, steady lines. Predators, in turn, followed the herds. Birds, insects, and small mammals may have responded to seasonal cues like rainfall or food availability. Insects may have swarmed or gone dormant. Early mammals perhaps migrated short distances, retreated into burrows, or changed their feeding behaviour. The rhythm of life was set not by clocks, but by the pulse of the earth, the turn of the planet, the orbit of the sun, the flow of ancient weather. Predator and prey, the dance of survival. In every ecosystem, life feeds on life, and the Jurassic was no different. Allosaurus, with its sharp teeth and strong arms, was one of the top predators. But hunting a 60-foot-long diplodocus was no easy task. Some paleontologists believe Allosaurus may have targeted juveniles or the weak, or scavenged more than we once thought. There is evidence that some predators may have worked together, coordinated hunting to bring down large prey. But the fossil record is ambiguous, and such behaviours are difficult to confirm. What we do know is this: bite marks on bones show evidence of feeding strategies. Coprolites contain bones, scales, and plant material, offering insight into diet. Some dinosaur skeletons show healed injuries, suggesting they survived attacks. In one remarkable case, a fossil of a Stegosaurus tailspike embedded in an Allosaurus bone suggests a violent encounter and the raw, tooth and claw reality of Jurassic life. Even herbivores had defences: armour, speed, size, and sharp tails. Survival wasn't guaranteed for any species. The struggle was constant. Sound and communication. Though the sounds of the Jurassic are lost to time, we can make educated guesses about how these creatures communicated. Hollow crests in dinosaurs like Dilophosaurus may have been used as resonating chambers. Pterosaurs had elongated skulls that might have amplified calls. Foot stomping, tail thumping, or bellowing may have been used to warn predators or signal to the herd. Just as elephants today can communicate through low-frequency vibrations, It's possible that massive sauropods sent signals through the ground, felt, not heard. The Jurassic world was not silent. It may have been filled with hoots, growls, wing beats, and rustling ferns. A living soundscape of warning, desire, play, and danger. No era lasts forever. The Jurassic, for all its richness and vibrancy, was only one chapter in Earth's deep unfolding story. And like all chapters, it came to an end, not with a sudden cataclysm, but with a slow and complex transition into what would become the Cretaceous period. This was no sharp boundary, no singular moment. Instead, the end of the Jurassic was a gradual shift, shaped by geological forces, biological changes, and the quiet unfolding of time. Let's walk through that transition and see how one world gave way to another. Shifting continents, changing climates. As the Jurassic drew to a close, the breakup of Pangaea continued and accelerated. North America and Eurasia were pulling farther away from Gondwana. The Atlantic Ocean was widening. New ocean basins were forming. Tectonic activity surged, giving rise to mountain ranges, rift valleys, and volcanic hotspots. These shifts affected global climate. Coastal areas flooded, and new inland seas appeared. Some regions became wetter. Others, particularly inland areas cut off from ocean influence, became more arid. Rainfall patterns shifted. Monsoons grew stronger in some places, weaker in others. All of these changes affected plant life, which in turn affected herbivores and the predators that depended on them. Ecosystems began to reconfigure. Some species adapted, others vanished. This was not the world-ending fire of an asteroid, but rather a long ecological reshuffling. The rise of new plant life. Perhaps one of the most important developments at the end of the Jurassic was the very first appearance of flowering plants, the angiosperms. While they remained rare and localized through the Jurassic, their presence marked a revolution in plant evolution. Unlike ferns, cycads, and conifers, flowering plants reproduce through enclosed seeds, fruit, and flowers that attracted insects and animal dispersers. Their emergence would change everything, but their rise to dominance would wait for the Cretaceous. Still, the late Jurassic saw a world slowly tilting toward new ecological balances. Ferns and conifers still dominated, but change was on the horizon, and where new plants appeared, new relationships followed. New players on the scene. As ecosystems shifted, so too did the animals that inhabited them. Toward the end of the Jurassic, new species of sauropods emerged, especially in South America and Africa. Theropods grew more diverse, including early relatives of Tyrannosaurus and dromaeosaurs, the raptors of the Cretaceous. Early birds became more refined, experimenting with better flight adaptations. Mammals continued to diversify quietly in the shadows. In the oceans, new species of pliosaurs, sharks, and ammonites appeared. Some adapted to specialized niches or deeper water environments. Change was underway, subtle, widespread, and unrelenting. Extinction without fire. Unlike the end of the Triassic, or the famous extinction that would close the Cretaceous, the end Jurassic extinction event was not a global apocalypse. It was more like a thinning of the ranks. Some groups of dinosaurs disappeared. Certain species of marine reptiles declined. Many ammonite families went extinct, and some corals vanished from the fossil record. The causes are likely tied to volcanic activity releasing carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide, climate cooling in some regions, shifts in ocean chemistry affecting marine life, rising sea levels, fragmenting land habitats. But there is no crater, no single smoking gun. The end of the Jurassic was shaped by a complex web of environmental changes rather than a single catastrophe. And from this slow transformation, a new era would rise, setting the stage for the Cretaceous. The last few million years of the Jurassic were a prelude to what was coming. In the Cretaceous, we would see the explosion of flowering plants, the rise of new dinosaur lineages, including Triceratops, Velociraptor, and Tyrannosaurus rex, the dominance of birds in the skies, the further spread and diversification of mammals, and eventually the most famous extinction of all. But those were stories for another time. What matters here is that the Jurassic, that great green world of ferns, conifers, and giants, gave birth to much of what would define the Mesozoic. It was not just a middle chapter, it was a pivot point, a time of lush abundance and bold experimentation. A world ruled by thunder lizards and silent flyers, a world in motion, breaking, growing, evolving, until now we've walked through a world long vanished, imagining its forests, its skies, its oceans, and the creatures that ruled them. But how do we know any of it? How do we know what the Earth looked like 150 million years ago? The answer lies in fossils, the preserved remnants of ancient life, and in the science of paleontology, a discipline that reads stone the way others read stories. This part of our journey is not about the creatures themselves, but about how we find them, how they are studied, and how these silent stones speak across the ages. What is a fossil? A fossil is not just a bone. It can be a tooth, a claw, or a skull, a footprint, a nest, or a burrow, a single pollen grain preserved in amber, a coprolite, fossilized dung full of clues, a perfect impression of a feather pressed into limestone. Most fossils form when an organism is buried quickly, under mud, sand, or volcanic ash. Over time, minerals seep in, replacing organic material and turning it into stone. The process can take thousands or millions of years, but fossilization is rare. Most living things decay without a trace. Only under the right conditions, protection from scavengers, the absence of oxygen, steady sedimentation, do remains become fossils. That's why every fossil is precious. It is the whisper of something that should have been lost. Fossil hotspots of the Jurassic across the world. Paleontologists have uncovered spectacular Jurassic fossil sites, each with its own treasures. Morrison Formation, USA. One of the most famous fossil beds in the world, stretching across the western United States. Here, fossils of Apatosaurus, Stegosaurus, Allosaurus, and many others have been found in abundance. It was once a vast floodplain, rich in plants, water, and life. Solnhofen limestone, Germany. A shallow tropical lagoon with fine-grained sediment perfect for preserving delicate details. This site gave us Archaeopteryx, complete with feathers, claws, and teeth. The fossils here are often so detailed, you can see skin impressions and wing membranes. Tendaguru Formation, Tanzania. A rich fossil site from East Africa, home to Giraffatitan, and many other massive sauropods. It provides a glimpse into Gondwana's version of the Jurassic, different in fauna, but just as lush. Yanliao Biota, China. Famous for its exceptional preservation of soft tissues, feathers, skin, and internal organs. Here, we find early birds and small feathered dinosaurs, a peek into the evolutionary transition. These locations, and many more, are like time capsules, preserving not just bones, but entire ecosystems, frozen in stone. Reading the rocks. The rocks that hold these fossils are just as important as the fossils themselves. Geologists read rock layers, or strata, like chapters in a book. The lower the layer, the older it is. And by studying the sequence of layers, they can reconstruct the history of an entire region. In each layer, clues are found. Volcanic ash can be radiometrically dated, giving exact ages. Pollen and spores reveal ancient plant communities. Isotopes tell us about climate conditions and ocean chemistry. Microfossils show what life existed at the base of the food chain. Together, paleontologists and geologists reconstruct the puzzle, piece by piece, layer by layer. The paleontologist's journey. The work of uncovering the Jurassic is not glamorous. It is dusty, meticulous, and filled with patience. Fossils are found in deserts, cliffs, quarries, and even construction sites. A single find may take weeks or months to extract, clean, and study. Field teams must carefully map the site, document the surroundings, and remove the fossil using chisels, brushes, and plaster jackets. Back in the lab, technicians use fine tools and microscopes to clean the fossil, sometimes revealing features invisible in the field. Then come the analyses. Comparisons with known species, CT scans to see inside, chemical tests to identify composition, and sometimes reconstructions, not just of bones, but of behaviors, ecosystems, and evolutionary relationships. It's detective work, guided by science and imagination. The fossils still hidden. For every fossil we find, thousands more remain buried. In Antarctica, beneath the ice, in deep jungle floors, in underexplored regions of Asia, Africa, and the deep sea. Some may be lost forever. Others await only the right hands, the right storm, or the right landslide to bring them to the surface. And when they do, they will add new pages to the Jurassic story. New species, new behaviors, new mysteries. Even now, new dinosaurs are being named every year. The Jurassic continues to unfold, one fossil at a time. We've traveled across time, through forests without flowers, over oceans teeming with reptilian hunters, across shifting continents, and beneath skies filled with feathered hopes. We've walked beside giants, crawled with insects, and peeked into nests nestled under ancient trees. And now, as our journey through the Jurassic comes to a close, we pause, not to mourn a lost world, but to reflect on what it meant and why it still matters. Because the Jurassic isn't just a chapter in Earth's past, it's a mirror, a reminder that the world is always in motion, that change is constant, and that life, in all its forms, is astonishingly resilient. A world alive with patterns. The more we study the Jurassic, the more we see patterns that echo into our own time. Creatures migrating with the seasons. Climate shifting, warming, drying, flooding. Species adapting, evolving, vanishing, only for new ones to rise in their place. It was a world of cycles, of extinction and innovation, of slow, deliberate change. And even though it happened over 145 million years ago, the lessons feel remarkably present. Because we too live in a world shaped by geology, by climate, by the balance of ecosystems. Our continents move, slowly but surely. Our oceans warm and cool. Our skies are filled with flight, our forests with green abundance. We are not separate from the past. We are descendants of it, from then to now. The creatures of the Jurassic are long gone, at least most of them, but their legacy remains. Every bird that sings outside your window is a living dinosaur. Every mammal, including us, descends from a lineage that survived by hiding in the shadows of giants. Every tree in the forest carries echoes of the conifers and cycads that shaded the sauropods. Even the continents beneath our feet were sculpted by Jurassic tectonics. The Earth we inhabit, its landforms, its soils, its climate patterns, were shaped in no small part by the slow processes of the Jurassic. It is in the mountains, in the rivers, in the sediments under our cities. a fragile world. For all its grandeur, the Jurassic was a world of balance, and that balance was often delicate. A few degrees of global temperature change, a shift in sea levels, a new mountain range forming, or a volcano erupting. These seemingly small events cascaded into transformations that changed the course of evolution. Today, as we face unprecedented ecological shifts, we are reminded that Earth always responds, but not always gently, and not always with the results we expect. The Jurassic tells us that change is inevitable, but it also tells us that life is adaptable, that beauty returns, that in the wake of loss, new forms rise, new songs are sung. The wonder of deep time. To imagine the Jurassic is to stretch the human mind across deep time, a scale so vast it humbles us. We often measure our lives in years, our plans in decades. But the rocks beneath our feet measure time in millions of years. The dinosaur that left a footprint in a soft riverbank never knew we would one day stare at it behind museum glass. The fern that died in a flood 160 million years ago never knew its impression would inspire awe centuries after it was unearthed. And yet, here we are, listening, imagining, learning. That is the power of paleontology. Not just to study bones, but to reconnect with the vastness of existence, to know that Earth is ancient and we are part of its story. A final thought. As you drift into rest, think of that Jurassic world, not as something gone, but as something alive in memory. In every fossil, a story. In every mountain, a history. In every breath, a lineage. The Earth has worn many faces. The Jurassic was one of its most magnificent, and though it is gone, it is not forgotten. Thank you for joining us on this journey. And now, as the world outside grows quiet and the stars begin to appear, let your mind wander through ancient forests, across primeval plains, beneath starlit skies of a world long past. Sleep well and dream of giants.